you wanted to talk a little bit about the fears that you get
Okay.
as a writer.
Yeah.
There were some writing fears. Do you want to take the reins here a
Yeah.
little bit of what you mean?
Yeah. So I think anytime you're writing, there's going to be just a lot of hesitation. And for me, I actually started out writing novels. So,
Yeah.
and then the first novel I wrote was I think it's called like a NaNoWriMo. But there's this thing where this was a really good one though, because there's this thing where it's like,
Yeah.
hey, on the month of like, I think it's October, you spend that month and you write a novel. You do like 50,000 words. You don't worry if it's good or not. You just try and write it. And then if you get a 50,000 word little, thing together, that is basically a small novel, and you have written a novel, and you can say you've written a novel. And it's a way of kind of being like, it doesn't have to be good. You can, you can basically like put in something like, oh, like Bob, da-da-da. Then you come up short on words, and you're like, well, now like add his last name to every single time you say Bob, and now you have like an extra word in there. And now you can add like, like you can describe him, tall Bob,
Yeah. It's just getting to the finish line.
Yes. So you're trying to do that. So my first novel was actually that, which I think was a great way of doing it.
It's a good exercise.
Yeah. You just let it pour out as best you can.
Yeah.
With my second novel, I then wondered, do I even have a second novel in me? Because when you write your first novel, my first one, because I was writing it so fast, like it was like 90% that original character was me.
Yeah.
90% all the surrounding characters were people I knew.
Right.
Like 90% of it was stories that I had lived through.
Right.
It was basically like an autobiography without being an autobiography.
Yeah.
So then I'm like, okay, second novel, what's left in the gas tank? Is it just that like kind of like B-side stuff I didn't put in the novel?
The remaining 10%.
Yeah. Which I think a lot of people do. They'll just do their second screenplay, their second novel, and it's just that like what was left over from the first one.
Right.
Because it takes you like, if you write your first thing at 20 years old, it took you 20 years to write your first thing. And you're putting 20 years worth of stories and experiences into it.
Yeah.
And now it's like, what's left for the next one? So what I ended up doing for the next one was, I got to a point where I felt like I've got the story, I feel ready to do it. But I wasn't writing. I couldn't get myself to start writing. So what I would do is like, I would just keep my notebook with me, and I would just put it down next to me. And I just wouldn't think about it, but it was just there next to me.
Yeah.
And it was there next to me for like weeks.
Yeah.
Where like, it's just there.
Yeah.
You
Taunting you.
Yeah, it's just there. But I wasn't worrying about it.
Yeah.
I just was leaving it next to me. And then one day I just started writing. Mm-hmm. And then I think there's this weird thing that happens, because with my second novel, I went like more that fantasy route, where I was just building my own world.
Okay. Yeah.
So the first one's a little bit more like autobiography. Second one's a little bit more fantasy. And then I get to this point where I get about halfway through, and I lose all motivation to write because the excitement is gone.
Yes.
So all the excitement's gone, and now it's just work.
Right.
And the motivation's gone, and now you have
Tedious.
to. And this is normal. It happens with every single thing I've ever done.
Every story I've written,
Yeah, you have to just trudge through. You have to expect this to happen, and now like just put the work in and get through it. Then what happens is you get to kind of like that final section, that final chapter, and you don't want to write it.
Yeah,
you really
then you're done.
Yes, you really don't want to write it, because then it's over.
Yeah,
and you have to force yourself to do it. Because you really don't want it to end.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's because you don't want that journey to end. Sometimes it's because if you have a finished product, now you have this feeling where you have to show it to people, and you're afraid to do that.
Yeah.
And anyway, you have to do it. So you get through it, you finish it. And now when you finish it, you have about a day or two of elation because you finished this thing.
Yes.
And then you get depressed.
Yes.
and this is something that like the like Olympic athletes go through, because you go through 4 years of training, you get the Olympics, you get your gold medal or whatever medal it is, and then you're super depressed for like 6 months.
Right.
Because you don't know what to do with yourself.
Yeah. What's
Because
next?
you just lost your purpose by finishing this thing.
Right.
So you're gonna be super down after you're done with this, because now you don't know what to do with yourself. That's fine. Then you're gonna be afraid to show it to people because you've invested so much of yourself into this thing. And for me, the trick is to always. Eventually, I got to the point where I wanted the product to be better than like. I didn't care so much about how I felt about it. I just wanted to have better art.
Yeah.
So like if you're putting the art first, you're okay with the criticisms, and you're going to hear things, and you're going to be constructive about everything that people say about it.
Right.
If you're putting yourself first, you're not going to want to hear anything.
Yeah.
Anything bad. You're going to want to hear only good stuff.
That is something about art. I hear a lot of artists, a lot of indie filmmakers that are like, make it, for you, if it's like, you're true to yourself and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's fine. That's great. But it's also like, that's a starting point. You write for yourself when you're first starting.
Yes.
But it's not about you. Like, you're writing for the people that are going to read it. You're writing for the people that are going to see it. Like, you're writing for everybody except for you.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's more than just yourself at stake. You're putting yourself out there for everybody else. It's not about you anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. There's for the people who can't stand that though, there's like, I guess like, musicians and artists. Sometimes they'll have a like one for them, one for me rule, where they'll write a song for the audience, and then they'll write a song for themselves because they need to like express themselves in the way that they want to express themselves. But nobody wants to hear or listen to or read the stuff that there's like just too small of an audience for that,
Yeah.
But anyway, and then you're gonna have, or at least I had this. It took me 5 novels. On my 5th novel, what was in my head, finally I could get down on paper.
Yeah.
What was in my head. And there's this weird disconnect when you're starting out where what you think what's in your head you're going to be able to put down on paper, you cannot.
Right.
That doesn't work. And then you also think that, if I get good enough, what's in my head will get put down on paper. But that's kind of not true either. It's almost like the two converge, like reality of you have this physical thing that you have to do, put words down on paper.
Yeah.
And your brain is now thinking in a way that is putting words down on paper meet. And now you're thinking in the written form.
Right.
And and it's like the same thing probably with directing as well, I would assume.
Yeah. Because like the way that you see things in your head is different from the way that like maybe a camera would see things, or it's different from the way that your eyes see.
Yeah.
If I am imagining something, it's an experience. Yeah. It's not a visual thing. And along those same lines, it's not a book. Like I'm not thinking in a book.
Yeah.
It's an experience. So I have to like almost translate my thoughts from an experience into the proper wording in the proper order that gets the point across and makes somebody feel something.
Yeah.
And that's difficult to do. It takes a lot of time to be able to get to that point. The thing that I feel like I get the most compliments on in my writing is my dialogue, where people are like, this is like really good. And it's like, I dabble in music, and so I kind of focus on having a rhythm to the dialogue.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you want it to feel natural. You want it to feel like a conversation, but you don't want it to be a conversation. Because if you have a conversation with your friend, there's a lot of like, a lot of this, a lot of like just stupid stuff that you just kind of naturally put out of your head because you're hanging out with your friend.
Right.
But when that's on camera, and somebody's watching it, they're like, man, this is annoying. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
Like, there needs to be a flow to what's being said. So it's like, you're not actually doing what's natural. You're doing what, it's an imitation of what's natural. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's an impression of what's natural.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think Hugh Grant does the normal talk very well, but he's so charismatic that he pulls it off.
Yes, well, it's meticulously planned out.
Yes.
Like, or, I mean, maybe it's not. Maybe it just comes naturally to him.
Yeah.
But it feels meticulously planned out. Like, he's not going to stumble over his words in a way that's annoying. He's stumbling over his words in a way that's almost melodic.
Yes.
There's a rhythm to it.
Yeah. Then...
yes.
Yeah, the fears of writing. But then there is writer's block.
Yes.
Don't listen to anyone who says there isn't writer's block. I one time heard someone say there isn't writer's block, and they didn't think that there was writer's block because there isn't a such thing as talker's block. Like, you never have a block while you're talking. That's not true.
Yeah.
I've gotten talker's block. If you're under enough stress in the right way, you will have a block at absolutely anything that you're trying to do, where you are stumbling and desperately trying to, like, just say a sentence.
Yeah.
With your mouth.
Or even listening. Like, you'll just, like, in a conversation with someone, they'll say something to you, and you're like, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Like,
there's a block for everything. And it's similar. Writer's block is kind of like similar to, like, when you can't maybe fall asleep. Where falling asleep is a relaxing thing. And if you are not relaxed, if you're anxious, if you're thinking about, like, I can only get 8 hours of sleep and then I got to get up in the morning and you can't fall asleep when you're anxious, because sleep is a relaxing thing.
Yeah.
Which is why you're always falling asleep when you're watching a movie, because you have that, like, zone out period where you're just now enraptured in the movie, and then you just fall asleep and you don't even realize you fell asleep.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about the movie and trying to fall asleep, now you can't fall asleep. Because you're thinking about falling asleep, which is an anxious thing. So writing is similar in that way. If you're anxious about writing, it's going to be very, very difficult to write.
Right.
Writing requires a little bit of relaxation, where your brain is spinning, thinking about the dialogue, thinking about the characters, thinking about the direction things are going to go in.
Yeah.
But that creative side of your brain is flashing. But the other side that's worried about, am I going to get this done? Am I going to get that done? That is released.
Yeah.
And pushed out.
And if I could kind of elaborate, it's like a forced relaxation in that you're not going to be able to write if you have like busy thoughts.
Yes.
It's why it's so difficult to write if you're working a full-time job and you get home and you're like, no, I'm just going to write like 20,000 pages, 20,000 words, like, whatever. And it's like, I can't write anything. It's like, well, you just had a big long day where you were using your brain all day and your thoughts are busy.
Yes.
And it helps if you have a job where, you're not thinking too hard.
Security guard.
Right. Or like if you get home and it's like, I'm not even going to think about work. I'm not going to think about the fact that I have to wake up tomorrow to go to work. Like, I have to empty my head of all other thoughts because I need to write right now. Yeah. And so it's like, it's this forced relaxation so you can be analytical about what you're doing.
Yeah. What I used to do is I'd go on I would write, then I would go on a walk for like an hour or two. To decompress. Sometimes it would take me like a half an hour, sometimes it would take me an hour to just decompress, get all of it out, then start working on what I'm going to be doing for the next day. Yeah. So then now you can relax, sleep, and then the next day it just sort of like pours out of you because you've just been spending all that sleeping time letting it ferment. Yeah. But yeah, it's sort of like, it is that, like, if you're playing tennis, and you're stiff, you can't even swing your arm. But you have to swing your arm loose and strong at the same time to hit the ball. And it's sort of this weird contradictory thing. Like, how am I both strong, tight, and loose at the same time to accomplish a goal?
Yeah.
And writing is a similar thing in your brain where you're both being strong in one way and loose in another way.
Yeah, it's a mental exercise.
Yes.
Yeah, it is difficult. I took kind of a different path. I started on screenwriting. And it was a lot more about, the idea for me when I first started, more about the idea than the execution, where it's just like, I want it to be this groundbreaking thing that no one's ever thought of. And, like I want it to be about the mind. I want it to be about the, time. I want it to, make people think. And so you get this thing out and it's a great idea.
Yeah.
You think. And then it's a terrible execution, but that doesn't matter to you because the idea is so good.
Yeah.
And the route that I took was to just start letting people read it, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
And then letting them tear it apart, which is brutal.
Yeah.
And it hurts, and you take it personally because it's so much of yourself, it's so much vulnerability, and then they're just like, okay, so this sucks, this is, kind of what I don't like about it, and I'm like, okay. And that is maybe the quickest and most brutal way to get better at something.
Yeah.
Is like, okay, well, next time I write something, I'm going to, like, take these words to heart and try and, like, do it better next time. So that was kind of my process, and it was my process for filmmaking as well, where like I have short films that are up on YouTube that still will get like a comment talking about how crappy it is.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, like it's from some like somebody who's like never probably I don't know, like it's interesting because it's like there's the stuff that people critique is like, okay, yeah, they were right. And then sometimes they critique something where it's like, the heck are they talking about? I can't even take this guy seriously. Like, that's the dumbest thing to critique.
Yeah.
But it's like, I think that I've gotten good at letting that stuff roll off my back. Where it's like, okay, yeah, like I know which critiques to take and be like, all right, I'll do better next time. And I know which critiques to be like, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, it takes a lot of brutality if you go that path, which is the path I took, unfortunately. Just putting stuff out, letting people tear it apart.
Yeah.
And then, being depressed about it for however long, and then like, okay, like I'm just gonna try and make it better next time.
Well, yeah, you're a tougher man than I am. It's a hard, but yeah, if your intention is I want to get better.
Yeah.
I want to get better, as fast and as streamlined as I can, then people critiquing it, then you don't listen to every critique, you listen to the critiques that are the same. Where if 2 or 3 or 4 people are saying the same thing, now that's something you need to pay attention to. But a lot of times it's like, because if I have a critique, I'll be like, this is sort of my preference. And if you keep that in mind, then like, okay, maybe this is just your own thing. But if you're hearing my preference from a bunch of different people, now you're like, maybe there's not an issue with this, reader or watcher. Maybe there's an issue with something that I'm doing.
There's a difference between like this was an odd cut, and then like hearing that from multiple people, and it's like, oh, you know what? Yeah, like that was an odd cut.
Yeah.
Or like somebody starting to like assign intention to a character, especially in horror films.
Yeah.
Where they're like, what, they see someone and then they just stand there? Like, I would have come in with a baseball bat and it's like, you wouldn't get out of here. You wouldn't have done crap. Like, have you ever like been scared and then frozen?
Yeah.
Like, anybody with life experience could tell you that this is how somebody reacts in a horror situation.
Yeah.
But everybody who has that critique, it's difficult for me to take them seriously. Where it's like, so you just don't have any life experience then? Like, get out of here. Like, I'm not going to take you seriously.
Yeah, some people freeze. Some people run.
Man, if I were there, man, I would have hit him. That monster would have hit the floor. Get out of here. You jerk.
There would have been 2 sounds. Me hitting him. No. That thing.
Him hitting the floor.
I think, I don't know. Is there anything we didn't really touch upon when it comes to like writing, fears and
I don't know. I don't think so. I think that really the main thing to take away from it is that that kind of fear and how long it takes and the depression that comes afterwards. It's all very, very scary and new the first, I don't know, 2-3 times that you do it.
Yeah.
But then you start to learn the structure. You start to learn the rules. You start to get familiar enough with the rules that you can break them and still make it really, really good. Sometimes better. The rules are there for amateurs, kids. So once you get to that point, your stuff just gets better. Your content is better.
Yeah.
And you look back at that first project that was like really personal to you, and you're like, this was kind of garbage, and like it was so much of me, but it was like I didn't know what I was doing. It's a skill like anything else. You need to practice. You need to do a lot of it. But once you get past all of that, you come up with a lot of ideas. You can come up with them frequently. I don't know if I'd say quickly. But you know how to manage them. You know how to get them on paper. And you know how to make them entertaining, where people are like, this is really, really good. So yeah, I think that's kind of the main takeaway, is that there is a finish line. Like if you keep doing it, you keep getting it out there. It's a little brutal at first, but like now you have this skill, and it's something that you don't get worse at. It's you get better at it every time. So that's the main takeaway, I think.
Yeah. And and you have, I don't think, in your whatever the last project you worked on was, that's not your last project. That's your first project. That leads to now the better project, which is your next project, because it's going to be better. And you have to just
keep going.
You got to want it to be better, and you got to want to work at it to make it better too.
Yeah. What did you learn from your last project?
Yeah.
Like apply that in a better way on your next project.